flipping my notebook so I don't lose my page. Lots of notes for this video. Throughout my life, I've had many great loves of my life, as I'll call them, and in varying degrees at varying times, they have been books, music, and movies. I am drawn to the stories that these things tell, the communities that they create. Everything about these forms of art really speak to me. So as I begin the journey of taking my content creation and YouTube channel more seriously, those are the three things I plan on focusing a lot of my content around. So if you like music, books, and movies, stick along. On top of it all, I'm a sentimentalist. I love logging all the books I've read, movies I've watched, records I've listened to. I love making lists. I love thinking about these things, talking about these things. And so at the end of every year, I like to look back on these lists I've compiled of all the books I've read, the movies I've watched, the albums I've listened to, and think about ways that I want to consume these art forms as media more mindfully and intentionally in the upcoming year. And while I'm still trying to figure that part out for myself, one thing I do have to share with you guys today are my top 5 books I've read this year, movies I've watched this year, and albums I've listened to. I love sitting down and watching the videos where people rank all the books they've read this year and do it in like, these are the books I gave 5 stars, 4 stars, blah, blah, blah. For me to do that with every book, album, and movie I've watched, we'd be here until 2026. So I decided I'm just going to pick the top 5 from each of those categories and share with you my favorites of the year. And these aren't necessarily things I consider the best of the year, because I can recognize that something is objectively very good and still not like it. It just could not be my cup of tea. It could just not hit my like drive home points, I guess. So with that in mind, these are just things that I really loved, and these are my favorites. So that's my little disclaimer. We're going to begin with my top 5 albums of the year. I thought about doing a couple honorable mentions for this, but truthfully, I couldn't choose just one. So I'm just gonna stick with the 5 that I knew in my heart and soul were my top 5 favorites. Throughout the year, I keep a running list of all the albums I listen to, all the ones I spend a lot of time with and really enjoy. So I can include that list in the description if you're interested. But these are my top 5 favorites. Again, not necessarily ones that would maybe be the top 5 best, but probably the albums I spent the most time listening to this year. Again, consulting my notes. Coming in at number 5, we have Big Sigh by Marika Hackman. This was released in January on Chrysalis Records, and as such, this album stuck with me throughout the entire year in a way that no other album this year really did. This is Marika Hackman's 4th studio album, and it takes on a more mature, vulnerable, yet authoritative and ultimately comforting tone than I think the rest of her albums have. Overall, it's a downbeat and more pensive album, but the lead single, No Caffeine, literally had me standing on my couch and dancing the first time I spun it. That single alone really makes the entire album for me, honestly, but the other single, Hanging, is also really good. Coming in at number 4 is Got a Story to Tell by The Sacred Souls. You won't see them on my Spotify Wrapped, but I'm telling you, this record did not leave my turntable for the entire month of October, which is when it came out on Daptone Records. This album is atmospheric, steady, and buttery. It's a love letter to love itself that makes you ache and cry and then soothes you over the same way that love itself does. It has that old school soul sound, but you can still tell it's fresh. It's nostalgic yet new. It sounds like you can slow dance with your lover to it in every lifetime, and it'll fit right in. I saw these guys live over the summer, and it was so much fun. It was at Nelsonville Music Festival, which is in the middle of this wooded farm area, and the lead singer literally ran off the stage for their song Runaway, ran off the stage, ran up the hill, through the crowd, through all these people in their lawn chairs, back through the crowd and back up to the stage, and like still hit all of his notes. They're just such an incredibly talented band, and I was really looking forward to this year, and it lived up to the hype. Coming in at number 3 is another nostalgic sounding album, and that is A Dream Is All We Know by the Lemon Twigs. Released in May on Captured Tracks, I listened to this album all summer. I was in love with the summer, in love with my life at that time, and this just really soundtracked that perfectly. It sounds just like the Beach Boys and the Beatles. It's self-produced 1960s inspired power pop, and this album may be the closest our generation will ever get to the Beatles and the Beach Boys. I saw them live just a couple weeks after this album came out actually, and they sounded amazing. They had all like old school vintage equipment. Plus everyone at the show was just so cool and dressed super well, and I was like, wow, like I feel like cool for being here. This next album may need no introduction, but coming in at number 2 is Brat by Charli XCX. I am a pop girly at heart and have been a Charli fan for so long, for like a decade probably. To see her be awarded with such high accolades and praise and mainstream success this year was such a delight. I love a cultural moment, and Brat certainly was that. Brat was like this summer's Barbie, if that makes sense. In a world where mainstream pop is often put down and repetitive and highly criticized, and people will roll their eyes if you tell them you like pop music, Brat is a highlight for modern pop music. Part of why I think it is because of its vulnerability coexisting with its party ability. And the remix album, which I kind of consider as part of this, is also a huge triumph, and it's a reminder of what a remix album should aspire to be. Should we do a little drum roll for my favorite album of the year? Charm by Clairo. This should be not surprising to you if you know me at all. In May, my boyfriend and I went to go see Freddie Gibbs in Chicago for the 10-year anniversary of Pinata, and El Michaels Affair was his backing band, and of course Clairo was there doing the backing vocals. And a lot of people were like, this is so random, like this makes no sense. And I was like, I bet El Michaels Affair is producing her next album. And boom, I was correct, because a month later, Charm was in our hands. I love all of Clairo's records, but I feel like in this album, she finally found the sound that she's been hearing in her head, if that makes sense. You can kind of hear her lean towards that loungy jazz sound on Sling, but I think with El Michaels Affair producing this, she really found the right combination to achieve that sound. Also, this is her first self-released record, so that may have given her some freedom in finding new collaborators and trying new things and just freedom with her sound. So this was such a delight to receive and listen to and spend time with as a Clairo fan. It hit so many boxes for me. It's orchestral, it's rock and jazz and folk and slow and psychedelic, and I feel very lucky because I got to see this live on my 25th birthday. She was in Columbus and I was there, and it was magical. And she randomly sang happy birthday. It obviously wasn't to me, it was to someone like much closer in the pit, but I pretended it was for me, and it was so magical. I think I might have had the best 25th birthday ever, and I'm sorry no one else can have it. It was mine, and it's all because of Clairo. Welcome to the books portion of the video. You see how I sat myself in front of my bookshelf? Very mindful, very demure, very, I know what I'm talking about. Before we start with the books, I just need to say, I know I said this is a top 5 video, but I had a really hard time choosing my top 5, so I do have an honorable mention, if that's okay to share with you. My honorable mention is Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto. I read this like in the bath one night in one sitting and just immersed myself into the grief and love in this short book. It's translated from the Japanese. It was first published in 1987, and wow, it's so good. I sobbed so much. It's about mothers and love and tragedy and grief and found family, and it just left this feeling like my heart was rubbed raw, and I just didn't feel right not including it on this list. Even though it's not technically in my top 5, I still wanted to mention it because I really loved this year. And I picked up a copy of one of her other novels, The Premonition, which I'm really looking forward to reading hopefully soon. Coming in at my number 5 favorite, I actually don't have the book here with me because I gave it to my dad to read and he loved it, so that's a testament to how universal it is between young women and old men, and that is Blood Over Bright Haven by M.L. Wang. In this standalone fantasy novel, we follow the talented and determined Skiona as she claws her way to become the first woman to be admitted into Tyran's High Magistry of Mages. Facing sexism and ill will from her new colleagues, Skyona is assigned a janitor named Amyl, where she should have been assigned a qualified lab assistant. However, there's more to Amyl than his class suggests. Before he was a janitor for the High Mages, he was part of a nomadic hunting tribe where he tragically became the sole survivor of that tribe after they attempted to cross the perilous magical barrier of Tyran. Together, Skyona and Amyl uncover the true cost of Tyran's magic. I loved everything about this book. The complexity of the characters, the ethical dilemmas they get put through, the world building. At no point could I guess where this was going. It's a powerful parallel to institutionalized power and how people weaponize it in the real world. It's a study on how we exploit power and people and resources in the name of the greater good that begs the question if we're actually better off for it. I loved this book. It was fast-paced, compelling, and I couldn't put it down. If you're a fantasy girly, or even if you're not a girly but you like fantasy books, you should definitely check this out. The magic system really reminds me of like software engineers in a way, and there's just like so much that you're like, this was good, this was smart, this was very thoughtful, and I really enjoyed it. In the year that Didion and Babbitts came out, this might be a controversial take for me to pull out, but coming in at number 4 on my list is Hollywood's Eve by Lily Analick. This is an intimate, awestruck portrait about Eve Babbitts, an it girl in the 60s and 70s of Hollywood who has kind of, until recently, fallen off the pop culture radar. This chronicles Eve's role as a true daughter of Los Angeles. She's the goddaughter of the famous composer Igor Stravinsky. She graduated from Hollywood High. She had these crazy groupie days in the rock and roll scene on the Sunset Strip. She designed album covers for bands. She had affairs with some of these band members, and then it also kind of follows her journey as an artist and writer. Ultimately, this book makes the argument that Eve Babbitts really is the quintessential LA writer and cool girl, wrapped up in her flaws and sometimes unlikable moments that make her the enigma we know her as today. So putting this at number 4 may be a controversial opinion, especially with all the criticism that Lily Analick has been facing with Didion and Babbitts, her new book, which chronicles the relationship between Eve Babbitts and Joan Didion, but I stand by my choice. I personally found Eve Babbitts back in July 2022 when I picked up Black Swans for the first time. She, in a single book, cemented herself as one of my favorite writers. And beyond that, I was itching to know more about who she was. Who is this woman? Who is Eve Babbitts? Part of what I loved about her was that her writing was so matter-of-fact, even when it was an opinion or even when it was wrong. And this biography exemplifies that. In a way that's maybe a little unconventional for a biography, this book matched my fascination with Eve Babbitts and pulled back the curtains on her. Curtains that maybe Eve Babbitts herself secretly wanted to keep shut. Within her writing, and I think within her personality, Eve has so much duality that contradicts itself, and I think that is where a lot of pain is created, though she makes a heavy-handed attempt to hide that pain, and I think she passes that off to a lot of people. But this book uncovers that and does a really good job at humanizing these contradicting dualities. This book was so much fun to read and was made more interesting than maybe a traditional biography would have been because of Lily Analick's fascination with Eve Babbitts and her personal relationship with her. If you're not an Eve Babbitts fan, honestly, I don't know if you'll like this, but I am a big Eve Babbitts fan, and reading this book kind of felt like kikiing with my girls over a common obsession, if that makes sense. The only surprising thing about this next book is that it took me so long to finally read it, and so coming in hot at number 3 is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. This is now the 3rd book I've read by her, and I kind of have, until now, an unspoken rule with myself that once I've read 3 books by a writer, I can consider them one of my favorite writers if I've liked all 3 works, of course. And so I've read this, Eileen, and Lapvona, and I loved Eileen, and I loved Lapvona, and now I've loved this. This book has kind of become the face of the sad girl literature movement and kind of people's go-to when they want an unlikable female character. It's kind of just become an iconic book. So if you don't know, My Year of Rest and Relaxation follows an unnamed narrator as she sets out to hibernate for a year in her New York City apartment with the goal of emerging a better version of herself. She wants to metaphorically shed her past life. And this hibernation is aided by her truly terrible therapist, who gives her a truly terrifying concoction of drugs, of prescription pills, to basically help her sleep through the year. Her life before this is one that I think most people would envy. She's young, thin, pretty. She works this cool art gallery job. She graduated from Columbia, and yet she feels utterly disgusted and alienated with this life. Hence the hibernation that she wants to do. Her life is kind of haunted by all of her past traumas, like this black hole that just keeps expanding because she doesn't confront them and deal with them. So some of the things that she deals with are the loss of her parents, a terrible boyfriend, and a sadomasochistic relationship with her best friend. I had the ending of this spoiled for me, and it still caught me off guard. I love reading about unlikable women and watching them make mean, terrible decisions and say awful things. In a way, reading this is cathartic because sometimes you just don't want to deal with your shit. You don't want to deal with your life, your mental health, your job, your relationships. And this book is just a cautionary tale of what happens when you don't deal with these things, and it's why it's important that we do. I know this book is divisive. A lot of people did not like it, but when I picked it up the first time years ago, I put it down so quickly, and I'm so glad I gave it a second try because I devoured this in one day. I needed to know how else this woman could just absolutely self-destruct her life. Again, this isn't one I would necessarily recommend to everyone, even though it is pretty mainstream, but if you like depraved, how much worse can it get type of stories, you should pick this up. Number 2 was a genuinely life-changing book for me, and that is Sala by Toni Morrison. Sala is about an intense and complicated friendship between two young black girls, Sula and Nell, as they grow up in a small Ohio town surrounded by racism, segregation, and on top of that, small town gossip and politics. Together they grow up and then eventually grow apart. There's a quote from the book that I think really captures their relationship to each other, and that is, "Because each had discovered years before that they were neither white nor male, and all that freedom and triumph was forbidden to them, they had set about creating something else to be." This was my first Toni Morrison novel, and I feel like I can mark my life as a reader as before Toni Morrison and after Toni Morrison. This is the best written book I have ever read. Morrison's understanding of how to get her reader to understand is amazing. She built in a short book a town that feels as real as the one I live in. She built people that I think breathe as much as you and I do. Yeah, it's all fictional. Sula is a woman who lives entirely on her own terms. She's an outlaw, and you admire her and hate her for it. Every word is impactful and intentional and meaningful and beautiful and ironic and necessary. And Sula as a book shows how beautiful things can be born out of complexity. I cannot wait to read more Toni Morrison. I have Sula and Song of Solomon on deck on my bookshelf, so those will probably be the next few I reach for. It's the moment we've all been waiting for. My number 1 favorite book of 2024. Drumroll, please. Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. No one was expecting this. No one foresaw me loving Sally Rooney. Who am I kidding? I'm a Sally Rooney stan, and I have been since day one. As you can see, I clearly have 3 copies of Intermezzo, and there's a funny story behind this. My first day at my new job at the bookstore was the day that Intermezzo came out, which I just love the poetry of that. So I, of course, bought a copy for myself that day, and this copy is signed, so I can never get rid of it. And that same day, as a gift and like a congratulations for starting your new job, my boyfriend bought me a copy, but he went to Barnes & Noble because he wanted it to be a surprise. So he ended up getting the Barnes & Noble cover, and it was just such a sweet gift. So this is the copy I read and annotated. I didn't really annotate a whole lot, I just underlined. But in the back, whenever people give me books, if they don't write it themselves, I write like who it's from and why and the date. So this just says, "From Nick on my first day, 9/24/24. I can never get rid of this copy because it's sentimental." And then I just bought the UK cover because I couldn't help myself. It's just so much better. So thus, 3 copies of Intermezzo live on my bookshelf. I'm a lucky gal. Intermezzo is a book about 2 brothers that have nothing in common except for the fact that they are both breathing their father's death. Peter is a lawyer in his 30s who is balancing two girlfriends, his enduring first love, and a college student. Ivan is a 22-year-old socially awkward competitive chess player who meets an older woman he rapidly grows feelings for. Ultimately, this is a book about the transformative power of love and human connection and why it's so necessary to help us get through. As a day one Sally Rooney stan, I'm going to say that Intermezzo is her best work so far. It reads like she's finally found what she's been trying to say, which is that human connection is all we have, and our love and relationships with each other are what propels us forward as a species, and it's beautiful and healing and something that needs to be cherished and preserved. The way she alternates the writing styles between Peter and Ivan, Peter has very much like a stream of consciousness kind of chapters. This really highlights the differences and like makes the differences stark between the two brothers, and beyond that, just proves her skill. It's got all the trademark Sally Rooney themes of yearning, miscommunication, class differences, and I think this one gets maybe a little bit more philosophical than her other ones, partly because of that stream of consciousness style. I think we can kind of see her leaning into this in Beautiful World, Where Are You, with the letters that the two characters write each other. This was really exciting to read for two reasons. Number one is because it was Sally Rooney just at the top of her game, the best of her craft, really honing in on her skill as a writer. And number two, it just tugged at my heartstrings, as all of her books do. But as we grieve and heal and love with these brothers and these characters, it's done in a way that is so relatable to experiences that I think we all go through at some point. So with that, this is my favorite book of the year. I am delighted to say that I finally saw Nosferatu, so I can finally film my top 5 favorite movies of the year. I was waiting to film this until I saw Nosferatu, and I'm so glad I waited because, spoiler alert, it does make an appearance on this list. I love going to the movies, I love watching movies, I love talking about movies, and narrowing this list down to 5 was pretty difficult, but ultimately my criteria for this were movies that I thought about long after I saw them, and it had to be released this year because I probably watched over 100 movies this year. Probably 60 of them were in theaters, but some of those 60 were previously released movies that they were just showing screenings of. So to help me narrow it down, I did 2024 releases only. If I had extended it beyond that, this list would have been so difficult. I really wanted to include The Beast, which came out in 2023. It's a French film, but it didn't come out in the US until 2024. So I was on the fence about if I should include that, but I had to be strict. I had to make a cutoff at some point. But these are the 5 films that I'm going to carry with me and remember 2024 being tied and connected to these films and like remember seeing them, if that makes sense. So, like always, I have my notes and we're just gonna get right into it. Number 5 is Kinds of Kindness, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. This is like if a short story collection was turned into a movie. It's comprised of 3 stories, all sharing the same cast and shuffling around their roles. The first story is about a man who has really no option to make decisions and choices in his life, and it's about him trying to kind of finally take control of his own life. The second story is about a man whose wife returns from being lost at sea, and she comes back just a little bit different. This is my favorite story in the whole film. And then the third story is about a woman who is trying to find someone with a special ability so that she can become their cult leader, basically, which that one was just absolutely insane. I love that each story got more and more absurd as it went on. And like I said, the cast is shuffled around, so you're seeing the same people in each of the story, just playing different characters. And the cast is crazy, starring Emma Stone, Jesse Plemons, Willem Dafoe, Joe Alwyn, and Margaret Qualley, who makes another appearance on this list, spoiler. I love everything Yorgos Lanthimos does. Poor Things and The Favorite were 2 of my favorite films of their years, and Poor Things might be one of my favorite films of all time. I love how Yorgos Lanthimos is like gothic and absurd and freaky, and I really enjoyed this. I'm really excited for Begonia to come out next year, which also stars Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons. I am like sat for anything Yorgos Lanthimos will do, and I love that he is working with Emma Stone for a 4th time now. I love when actors and directors kind of have a relationship like that where they work together on multiple films. Coming in at number 4 is Maxine, directed by T.I. West. When I say Maxine, I kind of am including Pearl and X in this as well. This is the 3rd and final installment of the X trilogy, starring Mia Goth. These 3 movies have been so fun, so fun to go to the movies and see over the last few years. Mia Goth just gives the most incredible performances time and time again, and I love the nods to all the other horror and slasher movies in this one, specifically because this one takes place on a movie set, so you can see them going into the house from Psycho, and it's very cool. Even though it does pay like all these homages, it still feels like a fresh take on the horror and slasher film genres, and I think that these 3 movies were really made with horror fans in mind, and I really loved them, and I love how all the stories connect to each other, and like I said, Mia Goth is just amazing in these, and I really cannot wait for A24 to release a box set or something, because I need the physical version of this ASAP. So like I said, Margaret Qualley does make another appearance on this list, and she's coming in hot at number 3 with The Substance, directed by Coralie Fargeat. This was actually a great year for Margaret Qualley because she was also in Drive Away Dolls, which came out earlier this year, which I liked. I thought her accent was terrible. Anyway, this is not about Drive Away Dolls. This is about The Substance. In The Substance, Demi Moore plays an aging, fading star who decides to try a black market drug that uses cell replication to create a younger, hotter version of the user. And this younger, hotter version of Demi Moore is played by Margaret Qualley. There's so much I loved about this movie. The body horror was gross and fantastic, and usually I kind of like shy away from body horror. Like, even though I like horror films, I don't look when things are happening, but this was just so weird that I couldn't look away. Like, I had to see what was happening. Eliza Sue is maybe the most memorable movie moment of the entire year for me. Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley both absolutely crushed their performances. And there's a scene of Dennis Quaid eating shrimp, which is actually maybe the scariest thing to come out of the movies this year. That scene alone is just so visceral and disgusting, and it's perfect. I love the themes of self-care, beauty standards, rebirth, everything. I just found so much depth in this, and I think that's why there's a few horror films on this list, because I feel like it's been very fantastic this year. The horror genre really was just at the peak of its game this year. I saw The Substance twice in theaters. It was a cultural moment, which I've said before, I love a cultural moment. I went and saw it with my best friend, and then I saw it with my boyfriend, and it was so fun because both times I took something new out of it. My second favorite movie of the year is one that also was a cultural moment, and that is Anora, directed by Sean Baker. I love everything Sean Baker has done. Tangerine, Red Rocket. I haven't seen The Florida Project yet, which is crazy because I love Willem Dafoe as well. But I really love Sean Baker, so I was really looking forward to this, and boy, did it live up to all my hopes and dreams for it. This film follows Anora, who's a sex worker played by Mikey Madison, who is amazing and gorgeous and stunningly talented, and she meets a wealthy young Russian bachelor, and she kind of gets her chance at her Cinderella story because they get married, and then it's about what happens when this fairy tale is threatened and the fallout of that. Mikey Madison is such a force in this. Her embodiment of this character and her physicality is so mesmerizing to watch. That's something I've really loved in movies this year, is the physical manifestation of the actors bringing these characters to life. I feel like this year we really saw a lot of younger actors really taking their stride and stepping in and just really living as their characters, if that makes sense. Yura Borisov as well did such a fantastic job, especially playing a character who really doesn't have that many lines and has to convey so much with just a look or a smirk. This movie's ending is so impactful. It will not leave my mind. I have not stopped thinking about it, and I'm still turning it over and reinterpreting it in my mind ever since I saw it. This is one of those movies that after I saw it, I liked it even more, because as I was reading interviews that Mikey Madison did and watching interviews, I really was like, wow, she really did her research and really took her time, and hearing her and Sean Baker talk about the movie really just highlighted what a masterpiece it was to me. I really specifically loved the interview she did in Interview Magazine, where she kind of talks about the ending a little bit and then talks about how she wears nudity as a costume. Sean Baker is just such a great writer and director, and hearing how much Mikey Madison improv'd her lines for this is just It's amazing. I love this movie and you should go watch it. So this is the moment we've all been waiting for, the moment that made me pause making this because I was like, I should wait to see this movie. Coming in, my favorite movie of the year is Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers. Nosferatu is a reimagining of a 1922 silent film of the same name. In this, Robert Eggers puts so much subtext into everything. The set design, the dialogue, the costuming, the camera shots. Like, there's so much you can examine in this movie and get some information out of. Like, this is like an English teacher's wet dream, right? Like, why are the curtains blue? Why is this shadow the way that it is in this shot? There's so much subtext that you can nerd out on for days, and frankly, that's what I have been doing. I know, I'm not being open-minded here, but I was very hesitant about Lily Rose Depp being cast in it because I think originally it was supposed to be Anya Taylor-Joy, who I love and had complete faith in, especially after her relationship with Eggers after being in The Witch. But then when I realized, oh, the casting had been changed to Lily Rose Depp, I was skeptical because she's a Nepo baby and I haven't really seen her in that many roles other than like The King, which she was just like Timothée Chalamet's sister, so it was like whatever. Anyway, Lily Rose Depp blew me away. I had very low expectations and shame on me for that. Again, this is something, like I said, I really loved this in younger actors this year. Like, she really embodied her character and brought so much physicality to it. There are scenes where she's shaking and I'm like, how does she shake her body like that? Like, how does she move it? And it comes out like there's no CGI. That's just how she moved her body. Like, it's just mind-blowing to me. Nicholas Hoult is in this and I love him in everything, and I'm so glad he had to turn out like a larger role because I feel like in these larger movies he kind of gets a side character, but he's such a good actor, so I'm glad he finally had his Scream Queen moment. And Bill Skarsgård is so fantastic as well. Again, no special effects used to alter his voice in any way. He really sounds like that, and he did such a fantastic job. The two people I went to see this with like forgot that that was Bill Skarsgård. After we were walking out of the movie talking about it, I was like, wow, Bill Skarsgård really brought it. And they both stopped walking and they were like, I didn't even realize that was him. He was so good. The I don't know, special effects they did to make him Count Orlok was just wow. Wow. I love how gothic and disturbing and freaky and beautiful and occasionally funny this movie is. Nosferatu really is the perfect movie for film buffs because there's so much to nerd out over, which I've really been enjoying. Like I said, I love a cultural moment, and I've really loved participating in and watching all these people online talking about their reactions, their reviews, their opinions, making memes about it, and not even online, offline too. Like, my entire friend group chat has been talking about Nosferatu for days. My boyfriend and I have been talking about Nosferatu for days, making inside jokes to the movie and like still wondering what certain things could mean. Beyond that, I've really been loving watching the press tour as well, hearing Robert Eggers, Lily Rose Depp, Willem Dafoe, Nicholas Hoult, all of them talk about their experiences filming the movie and share some of the behind the scenes things that happened. I cannot wait for this movie to get like the Criterion treatment upon its physical release because I need the full film with director's commentary. I need the behind the scenes footage. I need the cultural essays about the movie's impact and like explaining to me all the things that I might have missed. Until then, I'm so excited to just go back and watch this movie again in theaters. I think I'm gonna go again this week with some of my family and see it. I love that this movie is culturally impactful enough that it's extending beyond just film buffs and people who love movies. It's reaching like my mom, who maybe sees, 5 movies in the theaters a year. It's reaching my dad, who hasn't seen a movie in theaters since I dragged him to go see Parasite. Like, it's reaching so many different corners of the audience, and I really love that, and I think that's something so special, which beyond it just being an amazing and perfect film, it's part of why I'm putting Nosferatu at number 1, because I think it takes a truly special film to achieve that.